It's me, Egbert, once again. I'm the new owner of this station. I went out and hired the best talk radio consultant, Jeff Allen from News Talk STL, and told him to hire the worst talent he could find. Jeff did exactly as I told him. Ladies and gentlemen, here are Brad and John.
John, I keep forgetting to bring this up, but I know you're not a fan of this, but I am a fast food aficionado, and I had lunch at one of the new generation McDonald's. It's actually the McDonald's been there a long time, but it's the new style McDonald's. And I have to be honest with you, it was less than pleasurable, but that's a whole nother story.
Where was it? Where's the location?
Mid-Rivers at 364 at the old Highway 94.
I've been to that one. Yeah, they have the kiosk there that you can order from. They don't. The last time I went there, the kiosk didn't work, and the young woman behind the counter was like, "Yeah, they haven't been working all day. It's probably better that I just take your order." I said, "Okay, that's good."
Well, that's what we're going to talk about. But first, you turned me on to this guy, and how do you know him? Eapen Thampy?
He's been involved in Missouri campaigns for a long time, and at least 10 years. I think I met him at an event 10 years ago, and then I would say I probably went about 8 years without seeing him in the flesh. And he has a long history that he'll probably touch on with you with hemp and cannabis and things. Psychedelics, Brad, you might want to ask him about magic mushrooms. He's one of Missouri's foremost experts on that topic.
Okay, let's make the phone call right here. Let's see what happens. See if my phone's going to work. There's one ringy-dingy. With this big build-up and watching not answer. There's 3 rings.
Hi, Brad.
Eapen, how you doing?
Oh, just keeping America great.
Hey, you are on the air right now. You are live, so no potty mouth. And John Combest is on with me. But due to the fact that we don't have the most sophisticated equipment, John can hear you, but you can't hear John. So I'm pretty much going to do the entire interview by myself, if that's okay.
Gotcha.
Okay, now, you are, John just gave a little sort of a thumbnail sketch of you that currently, if someone said to you, Eapen Thampy, what do you do for a living? What would you say?
I'm a registered state and federal lobbyist here in Missouri. So that's what I do for a living.
And you're a lobbyist specifically in the area of marijuana, hemp, that kind of stuff?
Yeah. Actually, I'll go a little further than that, but I actually started the what you might call the cannabis policy legalization movement back in 2009. So I've been working on this issue for a long time.
So you were involved with the proposition that made recreational marijuana legal in the state of Missouri then?
Actually, we campaigned against Amendment 3 2 years ago.
Interesting.
There was a bunch of issues with the marijuana legalization proposal, but one of the primary ones was there was a licensing monopoly, and because there was a licensing monopoly, there's 38 pages in the Missouri Constitution that have really bad policy in it. One of the things people forget is that our recreational marijuana constitutional amendment actually created criminal penalties for possession. Like, for instance, you're constitutionally not allowed in the state of Missouri to possess over 3 ounces. So, you can look at it from a criminal justice standpoint. You can look at it from other policy standpoints. But we actually opposed Amendment 3 from a pro-legalization standpoint.
So I didn't know that. So essentially, over 3 ounces, what they're doing is by doing that, they're essentially saying, hey, you can't be a producer of marijuana unless you have a license. Is that pretty much the way they sort of did that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Their mentality and what they said on record with people like Josh Mitchum from Clover Cannabis said on record was, it's crazy to be able to possess unlimited amounts of marijuana, which, our response was there's no other item of personal property in the state of Missouri that there was a possession limit on.
Interesting. Now, you are also involved, and explain to me, I've talked about this before, the hemp situation. Once upon a time, hemp was a very big crop in the state of Missouri. Am I right on that?
Yeah, actually, before the Civil War, hemp was probably your number one agricultural export. Then after the Civil War, what kind of happened was you had, they built railroads to connect pretty much every part of the United States, and the livestock industry became, wildly profitable because of that. So, for instance, I live in Kansas City, right? So, if you were a cowboy back in the day, you would drive your cattle up from Texas to the Oklahoma Panhandle and land in the west bottoms of Kansas City, and get paid for your cattle, and the stockyards would ship your beef off to market, to a global market. But yeah.
Well, how did that impact hemp? Where does hemp come in that?
Well, hemp was a manually laborious crop, right? So, I mean, it grows fast here, and for, 150 years ago, it was a crop where, most of its applications were either for textiles, using the fiber, or for bird seed, using the seed. Because, in 1850, they didn't have, a lot of mechanized production capacity for these things. I mean, it was a slave industry, right? So the slaves got freed, and the railroads came in, and, industry transitioned to livestock.
Well, how did it get to be illegal? Because it's not a legal crop to grow in the state of Missouri. Am I correct on that?
Well, it's now legal. It's now fully legal. So in 2018, President Trump signed the federal farm bill, removing hemp from federal scheduling. So it's like fully federally legal. And kind of coterminously, like in 2014, I walked into Representative Paul Kurtman's office, started talking his ear off on the subject, and he ended up filing a bill, which we had a kind of a state version of the federal legislation that ultimately came to pass, and got that enacted in 2018. But part of the reason why the plant got made illegal was, there was large industrial interests at the time that owned, a lot of forests, which were, used for the wood pulp paper industry. And, hemp was a huge competitor to that, because you can crop hemp, 2-3 times a year. And like an acre of land will yield 4 times as much hemp fiber for paper than it will wood pulp. And you can, obviously you can't crop the forest every year. You have to wait, at least 20, 30 years before it is viable stock. So it partly was economic, and partly was because the flower, which contains the resinous part of the plant, which you can use as you can smoke it. That's where you get your cannabinoid production for. Part of that was, that stuff was demonized in the 1920s and 1930s. There's a number of social, economic, political factors that kind of intersected as to why it became illegal.
Now, explain to me the Delta-8 thing, because John and I have talked about this. The Delta-8 stuff is available at some convenience stores around the state of Missouri right now. You can go in and buy it, but they're trying to make it illegal. Why is that?
So the term marijuana and the term hemp are kind of legal terms of art. And I think in the 40s, Congress kind of makes this distinction, but the marijuana is any cannabis plant that has more than 0.03% Delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC. And Hemp is any plant with less than 0.3% Delta-8 THC, right? And it makes no sense. It's, there's no other plant that we classify legally according to the concentration of its secondary metabolite, which is what THC is for the plant. But what that means for you is, so you have Delta-9 THC, which is kind of the definitional constituent of cannabis that separates it legally into marijuana or hemp. And then you have Delta-8 THC, which is like the same molecule. It's what you'd refer to chemically as an isomer. Essentially the same molecule, just missing like one, I think, carbon bond. Right. And so you have probably somewhere between a dozen and 2 dozen what you'd call isomers of THC that you can either grow naturally from the plant, or you can convert one molecule into another. So there's a chemical conversion process that you can use to convert that a naturally occurring Delta-9 molecule into a Delta-8 molecule. So, I mean, it's from a pharmacological perspective, it's practically the same thing. The body treats it, processes it the same. When ingested, it goes through the liver. But yeah, it's essentially for your intents and purposes, it's essentially the same molecule, just with like a carbon bond knocked off, and gives you kind of a similar effect. Now, anecdotally, people tell you Delta-8 is about half or 2/3 as potent as Delta-9 THC, which is one reason why people use it. People use it. Yeah,
essentially, it's like a lower concentration of the kind of stuff you'd buy at the recreational stores.
In a layman's term, yes.
But how is it being sold legally? I mean, because this is the thing I don't understand. How can you sell this legally if it's essentially marijuana when there's this law on the books that say you have to have a license to sell marijuana recreationally?
So the 2018 Farm Bill, which federally removed hemp from federal drug scheduling, has some very interesting specific language in it, which says, hemp and all its derivatives, all of its isomers and extracts and so forth, are now federally legal. So, and part of it is, it's just wild. It's just weird to me that we define a plant according to the concentration of, how much of one molecule it produces, from a genetic standpoint. But in 2018, Congress legalized the production of basically any cannabinoid that wasn't more than 0.3% Delta-9 THC. So what happened was, you kind of remember the CBD boom, right? So,
right.
Hemp was kind of limited through, legalized through state pilot programs by the 2014 Farm Bill. So there was a couple more hoops you had to jump in before 2018. But, you had, people discovered that, there's more than just Delta-9 in this plant, right? And it produces, other similar molecules that have great medicinal benefits. And so what happened was, you kind of had the CBD boom where, people were like, let's, grow this plant and produce all these other cannabinoid molecules out of it, depending on its genetics. And so what happened was people realized, chemists realized, and actually this has been known science for 50 years at least, but people realized, if you produce one cannabinoid molecule, there's a chemical process where you can turn that molecule into any of its other brother or sister molecules, right? So, at some point, like probably around 2019, there was a massive glut in CBD overproduction. So people were like, can't make money on CBD anymore because the market is oversaturated. So what else can you do with this molecule? And so in the end, it became profitable to turn CBD into Delta-8 THC. You can turn it into CBN, CBG. If you have CBD, you can basically turn it through a variety of chemical processes into any other cannabinoid molecule. So, once people realize, hey, you can mass produce a federally legal THC compound, the market kind of took off for that.
Interesting. Well, Eapen, I've got to go. We're running up against a break here. I appreciate your information on this. I have to be honest with you. I think I'm more confused than when I started. But you, obviously, what you're talking about. And when you're talking about the chemical compounds, I didn't do well in chemistry in high school nor in college. So a little bit over my head. Appreciate it. Thank you very much, Eapen. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, no problem. Maybe we can cover the ongoing saga later time, but I definitely appreciate being on with you and John.
Okay, no problem. Talk to you later.
Here.
John, does that make any sense to you?
Hey, what's happening?
Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, it does. I think if you take the chemistry part out of it and you don't I don't mean you, Brad, but if anybody doesn't fixate on the chemistry part and just thinks of the narrative part that Ethan tells, I think it's pretty easy to understand. What I would like to hear, and you know what, Brad, maybe this would be a topic for even tomorrow. I'm going to be doing the call from the car tomorrow, so maybe it'd be a good B block if you agree to talk about that fight between Governor Parson and Governor Ashcroft, because Eapen's group has been involved on the idea of these products that are sold at convenience stores and liquor stores, and whether or not they should be regulated or not. And I think that's the hottest topic going on right now.
Well, and it's very similar to the quote-unquote gambling machines at the various gas stations and things like that.
I agree with you, Brad. There's definitely a parallel there.
Right. There's a loophole, shall we say, or a part of the law that's very unclear, which, and quite honestly, I go to a couple of gas stations. I know you don't go into gas stations. You're a guy that pays at the pump. And you never go in and eat the Twinkies and things like that. But I'm a guy that goes in all the time, and I am amazed at how many of those, what do you call them? They don't. And that's it, the guy who runs that whole company. He's out in Wildwood, isn't he? Out Wildwood or Chesterfield?
Yeah, it's Torch Electronics. Yeah,
right. And they don't call them slot machines. They don't call them video poker. What do they call them again? They call them. There's a term.
I don't know. I don't know what the I don't know what the euphemism is. Maybe games of chance or entertainment. You're right though. There's a phrase for them. I don't know exactly what it is.
Right. And I find it interesting that when you're dealing with the law, and if you get a good lawyer who, and I have been on the receiving end and the sending end of this kind of situation where if you get something and you essentially say, okay, the law says this, but it doesn't say this, so I can do this, which essentially is what is, which essentially is the gambling thing. And also with this Delta-8, isn't that pretty much the whole situation, that they're essentially saying, okay, it doesn't prohibit us, so we're just going to do it, right?
Yeah, and I think that goes back to something that you and I have talked about a lot, Brad, which is that if Amendment 3 was written better, like let's just be bold and say it wasn't written well and it should have been written better, then isn't it the marijuana industry's fault for not writing this law better?
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. There's all sorts of crazy stuff. The one thing that's become a high-profile issue, which I don't think is going to go away, people say it's settled now, but this deal with the stacking of the tax revenue. The whole idea behind the fact that if there's a marijuana store that's in unincorporated St. Charles County, the county gets that money. But if that marijuana store is in O'Fallon, then there's 3% that goes to O'Fallon and 3% that goes to the county, which is like, okay. And that's why the crazy situation is that your tax rate for legal marijuana in the city of St. Louis is lower than in almost all the other different municipalities, because if I understand it, I don't think the St. Louis city, since it's no county, the city is the only tax you get. You don't get the county tax. Isn't that the way it's sort of been?
Yeah, but the city also has the reparations tax. And that's only for you, Brad, you caucasoid.
John. Okay, we have to take a break.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's C-O-M-B-E-S-T. John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?